Wow. All right. So guys, so that Alacrity guy, he fucking called Sam Seder. Same guy. How to unsub? Fuck you. You should call Sam Seder. Yeah, if this guy could do it, I could easily do it. But I wonder if I should just challenge him to a formal debate since I'm a famous 400 viewer Andy. Come a comedian. All right, let's watch this.
I am Alacrity from Alabama, and I shall be swift.
Can you guys hear this shit? He goes, I am Alacrity from Alabama, and I shall be swift. What? Hold on.
I am Alacrity from Alabama, and I shall be swift.
Alacrity from Alabama. Swift
yes.
Alacrity. Okay.
Yes. So I watched your Yaron versus
your own
debate. I watched it. And I just wanted to ask you a point. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's Yaron, I believe is how you pronounce his name.
Oh, forgive me. Anyway, I watched the debate, and there was this one point that there were several points, but the one that stood out to me the most was when you were addressing slavery with him, and you mentioned how you had interviewed several authors about slavery, about how it was largely responsible for the economic boons experienced by various countries around the world, developed what are now developed countries that were developing then, from slavery and the slave triangle, like Matt said. So I just wanted to say that I think that is a bit, I don't know who the authors you spoke to were, but I think that is a bit of an oversimplification, given the fact that slavery, while yes, it can be used to generate capital formation, it does have several detrimental effects technologically and industrially. In fact, it's the abundance of slave labor that can actually inhibit technological advancement. And I have empirical evidence for this. Would you like me to detail it? I have some data.
I mean, the idea that if I have free labor, an endless supply of free labor to pick cotton, so I don't now have to develop a mechanized cotton picker. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't seem terribly profound to me.
Well, I see, but what is the point then when you say that slavery that slavery was a driving force of industrialization, economic growth, then when you say
this entire project, here's what I would say, like tobacco in Virginia would not have been possible without slavery, without plantation slavery. Like, so whether it had later effects on depressing industrial development or whatever, it's just not, it gave you the chance to do it. That's where those profits came from. Those profits were not possible without slavery.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not even sure what the point of saying, like, well, on day one, because slavery is involved there, that, I mean, if your argument is, hey, these folks were idiots because they went for the low hanging fruit of enslaving people and getting free labor, and that's the way that they created the economic engine. They could have probably made 15 to 20% more had they waited a couple of years for somebody to invent a cotton picker.
But they invented with the profits they got from slavery.
Of course. And let's be clear here. Like, the option of a plantation owner to, go and buy slaves or wait until someone invents a machine that picks cotton. Like, I don't even understand do I think that the existence of free labor that is far more accessible to everybody than machines that hypothetically might exist in the future where they're not free labor? I'm not even sure of, like, aside from that not being terribly profound, what is the point of that? What does that have to do with the argument that we had with Yaron?
Well, a few things earlier. As you said earlier, that if my argument is that, well, they just should have waited for more inventions. No, I must say that is a mischaracterization. As how it relates back to Yaron, I'm not even sure what your point wasn't bringing it up in the first place.
I didn't bring up slavery. He did.
He said it was really easy to see whose fruits of the labor are. It's easy to attribute, like ownership, and it's definitely not. The history of this entire continent is that is not the case.
Exactly.
And it wasn't just like the white people were brought over here in bondage to serve in those places too, mainly to balance out the black demography.
Well, first of all, Mr. Seder, I wanted to mention that if you, again, as I say, I was addressing specifically when you defended it after Yaron had got done saying his bit. You then came in and said with the author, that you had interviewed like half a dozen authors, and you had said that was the case. But the thing is that
you're not even refuting my point. You're simply saying that they could have made more if they didn't use slavery. That's a hypothetical that could be possible, but the point is they did get slaves, and it did drive the free labor did drive the development of a cotton industry, or in the case of Virginia, a tobacco industry. It did provide opportunities for bankers in the North to finance and export.
Early ports in the North were like servicing those ships. That's what, like, get some turpentine from like Boston, right? Like that's what those ports were important for, because the real money was in getting slaves to the Caribbean and sugar and rum out of there.
Yes. I mean, I don't know. The idea that if I start a YouTube channel and I get a bunch of views and I monetize it, that may be the case, but you haven't optimized it. Well, okay, so there's room for me to make 20% more. I mean, even if I stipulate what you're talking about, which I will for the sake of argument, because I find it a completely irrelevant argument. What is your point?
Let's see what he's gonna say. I bet you he's just gonna repeat the same thing. Let's see.
My point is that you've grossly overstated the role that it played. For example, some studies say it's only responsible for about 5 to 13% of the capital formation. In fact, the role of slavery is even more detrimental to.
I'm sorry, you look at these stats, but how about looking at history? Like any of these colonies, dude, you look at the formation of these colonies and who's building the stuff, who's chopping the trees down.
Mr. Seder, I was not unable to hear what Matt, I believe that's Matt, I don't know who that was.
Matt is saying that you are not accounting.
Bruh, Alacrity just calls on his phone. He literally calls on his phone. Mr. C. Let me look at his YouTube. Hold on. He posted our debate too. I think he posted our debate too. He said, look what he fucking named our debate. Alacrity versus Marxist cult leader. He called it Alacrity versus Marxist cult leader, and in our debate, you couldn't even hear me in his video. You can't even hear me because he's on his phone. Like, why would you watch his video instead of mine? You can't even hear his. I will dispatch your arguments with alacrity.
You're looking at hypotheticals about.
No, I wasn't finished yet.
Excuse me.
I was not.
I'm going to explain to you what he was saying. You're looking at hypotheticals that are telling you that there could have been a greater return if they didn't use slaves and they developed technology. And Matt is telling you, look at history. Look at the way that the people organize themselves. Look at where the sources of revenue and economic activity were happening, and you can see that they would import a bunch of slaves. Now, maybe they weren't doing it efficiently enough, and maybe I overstated the percentage in which people, but the absence of technology because slavery may have inhibited technology's growth doesn't in any way contradict the notion that the economy and that slavery drove all this economic activity.
Yes, it does, because if it's only responsible for about 5 to 13% of capital formation, you aren't accounting for the other factors. For example, if you look at the roots of the Industrial Revolution, you actually find that there is an incentive for industrialization where wages were higher. For example, in
Okay,
Britain,
wait a second. Listen.
Wait,
No, wait. Here's why I'm interrupting you.
The thing with Alacrity that I noticed is that he'll find like one study and just make his whole argument about that one study he saw. You know? That's what I notice.
I don't care. I don't care.
Why-
I mean, even if you are
Why-
100% right, let me stipulate, you're 100% right. I grossly overstated the amount that slavery, it was just more of like there was no economic incentive for anybody to maintain slaves. It was more of just like
They were doing it
a
for
hobby.
fun. They hated black people that much.
It was a hobby, and it was just out and out racism. What's your point? I've stipulated your point.
My point is that when you talk about slavery in relation to capitalism, often as
Wait, you know what's kind of weird is hold on, we're not exiting out of it, but I'm sorry, maybe we're gonna get to it later in the video. But why the fuck did Sam Seder call it this? He said libertarian tries to justify slavery. Huh? Maybe we have to watch more. But so far, that is not what Alacrity is saying. Like Alacrity's point isn't clear, but he's not saying that. That's so that's like slanderous. Well, maybe it'll be justified. We'll see. Maybe calling it that will be justified, I mean, as we watch the video. Oh, that's what he told them to get on the call? Really? How do you know?
in the context you're referring to it, you're drawing implications from it, economic implications from it that are simply flawed when you overstate the amount is all that I'm saying. For example, as I was saying, if you look at the roots of the Industrial Revolution...
Let me tell you something.
Your numbers
I don't care.
Bro.
I honestly don't care. I will stipulate
Well,
that slavery, there's two opinions about slavery. One is that it drove economic activity. And the other opinion is yours, that it's just about specifically wanting to imprison people from Africa and get their free labor because it was more of like a hobby, or maybe it was a status symbol or something like that. Either way, it doesn't really, I mean, I guess in your mind, it protects criticism of capitalism and a critique of capitalism. But then I would say, like, well, people were accumulating too much money if that's what their hobby was. I would say that we need to have confiscatory taxation so that we cannot develop such hobbies that would lead to the brutalization and the enslavement.
Most hobbies don't. Most hobbies are like collecting baseball cards. It doesn't necessarily. Well, I guess they do accumulate in, or playing fantasy football doesn't mean that you're accumulating wealth and enslaving people.
Well, what you stated, my opinion, was that people just did it as a hobby. No, that's a gross mischaracterization. There is plenty of room for irrational in economic behavior. My point is,
they were very irrationally economically behaved. I mean, look, dude, go read about the Industrial Revolution. Go read about like what drove. Go look at the numbers of slaves that are imported as the ability for technology to weave the cotton, to ship the cotton.
That is not the only thing that I was stating. As I'm trying to state, slavery existed almost everywhere in world history. It existed for thousands of years. So slavery was not the driving factor. But if you look at places where the Industrial Revolution occurred, and you look at wage rates, for example, in Britain before the Industrial Revolution,
you know what? Honestly,
you're full of shit.
Like this is the most masturbatory conversation I could imagine. It has nothing to do with the conversation I had with Yaron. It has nothing to do with anything. I don't understand what your point is. Tell me your point.
But I keep getting interrupted, Mr. Seder. Anyway, as I was saying, slavery existed everywhere in the world and existed for thousands of years. So you need to look at what makes places different if you want to.
This is such a bullshit argument. You cannot. The thing is that even though slavery existed for thousands of years, the form slavery took in early modernity was unprecedented in the history of humanity, specifically in the North American colonies. yeah, that was not like, just an extension of thousands of years of slavery or whatever. Like, you guys have to understand, when it comes to slavery in the ancient world, you need to understand that the distinction between slave, serf, subservient, whatever, is really blurred. Like, it's not the idea of owning a human being, that you could do anything you wanted to and that you just like whimsically whatever, that's not actually the same thing as slavery in the ancient world necessarily. That's a very modern kind of thing. That's a very modern thing. Like slavery was a type of institution in the ancient world that had customs and whatever, and it was not just like people were owned the same way objects in the modern world are owned, Like, it's not, yeah, it's completely different. South America enslaved up to 10 times as many people as the USSA. Yeah, maybe, but it's not really the point. Like a class system or hierarchy, yeah, kind of. I'll give you an example of this, right? This is the one that usually will fucking impress people. So, there were warrior military slaves in Egypt, and they were called the Mamluks. And they became so respected in society, so revered, that people would try to sell themselves into slavery so they could be Mamluks. And eventually the Mamluks took over the fucking state, and they had their own dynasty. So it's not as clear as, that's not something that's really thinkable when it comes to slavery in North Africa, Yeah, but those were the highest ranking slaves. Well, those slaves had a better status in society than free people. That's the thing. Prominent free people, wealthy free people wanted to sell themselves into slavery so they could be Mamluks. Yeah, Mamluks literally means the owned ones. Yeah. So, the way people try to talk about it is just not really accurate.
See where if you want to understand the causes for new events like the Industrial Revolution, and there's empirical evidence that high wage, which existed in Britain, for example, in Britain, wages per day for workers were about 11 grams of silver per day, where in India or China, they're only about 3 or 4 grams silver per day. So my point is, no.
All right. I'm sorry. You've been on the phone for 11 minutes, and if you haven't said...
In South India, too, a certain North African slave ended up being a South Indian king. That's the other thing, is that in the ancient world, or the non-European world, there was a way to get out of slavery. There was a way to climb the social ladder. It wasn't like, you know what I mean? It wasn't the same. It was not the same. It was not the same as treating people like farm animals. I'll just say that. It just was not the same. Like, was life good for slaves overall? Of course not. But life really wasn't good for anyone, to be honest. Unless you were, like, super rich. That's how it is in the pre-modern world. Yeah, it wasn't patrilineal. And yeah, there wasn't a hard line. Roman slavery is more difficult, right? But even in Roman slavery, it's not the way people think. There's a reason why the Roman Empire fucking met the fate that it did. The Janissaries, yeah, of course. There's many cases of that. What was the slave society that Marx and Engels described? More or less, they were just describing classical society, which is Greece and Rome. Marx and Engels basically just describing Hellenistic society. That's what they were just talking about. Greece and Rome. You guys remember, let me tell you why you have to don't think Marx and Engels were talking about like cookie cutter blueprint. Let me tell you why. So Marx and Engels they say there's capitalism, feudalism, slave society, and what was the one before then? Primitive, some kind of primitive communism, right? That's kind of like the idea. Well, here's the thing. There's a fourth category, or a fifth category. They called it the Asiatic mode of production. it's like a cheat code, because the Asiatic mode of production accounts for all of humanity outside of Europe. You know what I mean? So you got to be careful. You have to really understand. You shouldn't be like thinking like, oh yeah, Marx and Engels are talking about universal steps of human evolution. It's not what they're talking about. They're talking about a very specific lineage that culminates in socialism, in Western socialism, right? But you know, the think about it. What is the Asiatic mode of production? The Asiatic mode of production was all of human history. And here's the peculiar thing about it. Here's what's very interesting, and this is what supports my thesis that communism is the Asiatic mode of production. Because the Asiatic mode of production doesn't even have a history. It doesn't have a history within Marx and Engels' scheme, because the Asiatic mode of production is the same thing from the times of the Persian Empire in Alexander's time up until the fucking gunpowder empires. And according to Marx and Engels, it's the same mode of production. Is there no class struggle? There is. Engels describes the class struggle that happens in the Asiatic mode of production as a cyclical class struggle. In other words, it's like a cyclical change of dynasties, and pretty much that's it. There's no fundamental historical ruptures and breaks. And that's very interesting, you know? And Marx actually said that the key distinction between the Asiatic mode of production and Europe was that all of these European modes of production correspond to evolved and elaborated institutions of private property. And Marx says in Asia, there's no clear institution of private property at all. I mean, private property in a sense obviously exists, but as an institution that is, as like a right, an absolute right given to the polity, it doesn't. You know, pretty much everything is owned by the monarch, more or less. There's a universal ownership in a sense, right? It's almost like Marx almost looked over the fact that he was describing some kind of socialism, right? In the Asiatic mode of production, the institution of private property is not developed, and it's not even very clear at all. Why wasn't the Asiatic mode of production possible in Europe? You have to understand that Europe developed under the backdrop of Asiatic modes of production. Without the Persian Empire, there would have been no Greece. You can actually interpret Greece, ancient Greek states, as kinds of experimental rebellions against the Persian Empire or whatever, right? Here's the thing, though, is that if you don't look at it that way, then the plain truth is the fact that in Asiatic societies like Carthage and others, there were institutions of like democracy of some kind, similar to ancient Greece. The thing that distinguished ancient Greece for the West, well, a lot of it is kind of superimposed historically, is philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, and its relation to statehood and so on, and the rights and so on. Can you apply the concept of primitive communism everywhere? I don't know what you mean. No, you really can't. You really can't. I think primitive communism just refers to a very specific state that is devoid of basically before the so-called agricultural revolution. But these categories are not very useful today. I mean, you're not going to really understand a society by just calling it primitive communism. I think it's a bit anachronistic to call the Asiatic mode of production socialist. Maybe that continuity is why socialism won in the underdeveloped world. That's exactly why it did, yes. I think the Asiatic mode of production is the default mode of production of mankind. Europe was an outlier. You see, Europe was the only outlier. Think about it. Even, and if you don't believe me, even fucking Mesoamerican and the South American civilizations were also Asiatic modes of production. They had zero contact with Asia, and yet they were also Asiatic mode of productions. Look at Egypt. Egypt was an Asiatic mode of production. Egypt was in Africa. Ethiopia, the same thing. Great Zimbabwe and these, the African civilizations, same thing. So you're starting to notice a pattern. What system did Genghis Khan use? The Mongol Empire would be considered an Asiatic. They would all be considered Asiatic modes of production within classical Marxism. Are Marx's letters about the existence of agricultural communes in Eastern Europe and Russia a transitional system between these spheres? Yes. But specifically, Marx was actually pretty clear that the existence of these communes in Russia would allow the Russians to skip capitalism. And it's not just that they would skip capitalism into socialism, they would skip capitalism into modernity, because the key thing here is industrial modernity. Why wasn't Greece an Asian mode of production? Because Greece was not a unified... Here's the important thing. Greece was not unified. Greece was full of a bunch of city-states. And these city-states were moments in a kind of bigger story. A story that involves the Persian Empire. A story that involves Alexander and so on and so on. Like, these were just kind of snapshots of a bigger historical thing going on. What separated Rome from other Asian empires? To me, it's very clear that the main thing that's different between Rome and the rest is the Republic. I don't think there's something similar to a republic in the other empires. Rome was a republic. Rome did not have a king. Didn't have a monarch. Which is very much an outlier for the ancient world, as far as I know. Had an emperor? The empire had an emperor, yes. Okay, why wasn't the Roman Empire, okay, an Asian empire? Similar to an Asian empire. I actually don't know how different it really was. I probably could produce a better answer for this if I study more. I think mainly it's because the Roman Empire basically endangered the seeds of its demise in the form of what is it called? What was the landowning system called in Rome? This would be the developed form of private property Marx was talking about. So the Roman Empire, yeah, the latifundia, yes. So while Rome was an empire, it had a developed form of private property. This is what separates it from the Asian empires. It was a slave-based economy. We know. So was everyone else. I mean, you guys want to know something funny? Is that actually in the Islamic world, slavery, as far as I remember, was not the linchpin of the economy. Slaves were not agricultural slaves that were like in Rome, for example. Slavery in the Islamic world was mainly for domestic servitude. It was basically like a luxury. Was most slavery in African and Arab work most similar to serfdom? The only reason I would compare it to serfdom is because it wasn't just slavery and that's it. You own it like you own a cow and that's it. It was a specific institution with a specific custom to it. It was not like a blank check of just owning this commodity. It was a wartime institution, yeah. And sexual slavery, yeah, that was definitely a thing. But let me fucking get the ball rolling here. What really separated marriage from slavery at that time? They were very similar. I mean, I don't know what the real distinction between those two really were, in a sense, At that time. Admit random, have you seen what the Romans said about the British? Yeah, I saw. I did see. Property rights, yeah. More or less, yeah. Alright, let's finish this debate.
Said your point by then it's just going to be a waste of time. And it's not because I was talking over you. It's because you're coming in and telling me that I had a gross miscalculation of the value of slavery to the economics of this country. Now, and I even stipulated that so that you could make your point. And if that's the only point, then okay, that's your argument.
This is what happens when you read econ to the exclusion of history.
Facts don't care about your feelings, Matt.
Like, go tell William Byrd II, owner of 200 slaves in Virginia, that, hey, actually, you could do this more profitably if you just hire white people. No, that wouldn't have worked. They would have, this is about control. Race is basically a technology for those people to exploit people based on the color of their skin. And they brought black people over because they were enslaving Native Americans, but guess what? They escape. And you have a problem with enslaving white people because you have the people from your home countries that have issues with that. So you enslave black people because that.
You know what I don't get? Why do you get paid to have a wife? Why are you why? What? I don't get that. Why? What is the point of a dowry? Can someone explain it to me? How does it make sense that you get paid for marrying someone? Status? I know, but since property is patrilineal, what does the family gain from? I think it's supposed to incentivize reproduction. That's really weird. Women didn't carry the family line, so they were a burden on clan-style family. It's a family-level thing, proves you can take care of the daughter. No, but you don't get what I'm saying. If you marry, you get paid. It's not like the father's being paid. The father is paying a husband to marry their daughter. I think it's for the couple to have their own nest. I'm trying to make sense of the tradition, though. Take my daughter. Yeah, I don't get it. I really don't get it. That makes no sense. I think it's because the man was traditionally meant to care for the women. I don't know, it's weird. It's kind of weird. Yeah, but why would families want a titled husband? Like, how do you benefit from that? It's not patrilineal. A form of protection for the wife. And her security just in case. At the same time, the husband could only dispose of his wife's dowry with her consent, and he had no rights to her premarital property. Since after marriage the woman was to be kept by her husband, the dowry was her contribution into the family's finances. It's very strange to me. It's like you pay someone to put your truck in their backyard. Oh, okay, you know what? This one makes more sense to me. The dowry is what the bride, the wealth that the bride is entitled to, that's transferred. Your Discord wants me to speak with you. Then get in. What do you want to talk about? Ego, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to speak about? Come a comedian. You come and type in general so we can confirm it's you. Who said they wanted you to speak with me? Are we finishing this debate? Yes, we are.
That's where the profit for tobacco is.
Yep.
And the point he's trying to make is that industrialization was happening at a greater rate and making more money. Therefore, what slavery was like.
I was quarantined for speaking about femboys. They're pissed I'm an ecologist. I don't care about femboys. So, do you want to talk about ecology or something? Ridiculous. I don't know why you got banned from Discord. Why did you get banned? Wikipedia says it's based on a type of agriculture society practices. In societies where women help with agriculture, they would pay the bride price instead of dowry. Yeah, that makes sense.
An artifact, basically, and not like a relevant driver of like American growth in terms of economic might.
The major input, like we think about these things like that. Libertarians like think they're like they know Econ 100. They need to know Econ 400, where you don't look at these things isolated from like the British economy is.
They want me to. I'm wondering if you're anti-ecology. Yes, I am. In a sense, I am. Yes. I'm against. You're for degrowth, right? You're a degrowth guy. We can talk about that. You're degrowth, right? Yeah, get in VC. We'll talk about it. Go ahead. Get in VC. I'll drag you up.
Separate from the American one. No, where do you think where do you think that cotton is going?
What were some of those books?
Stop
King
it,
Cotton?
globalists.
What was the name of those books? We interviewed a couple of years ago. Like there was like 3 or 4 books on this that I invite that libertarian to read. King Cotton was one of them. I can't remember what the other two.
Yeah, Sven Beckert's Slavery's Capitalism.
I'm against increasing carbon emissions. Yeah, get in my VC.
Was like a few writers contributed to that one.
Yeah, I mean, but even if I concede the point, which I don't, but for the sake of argument, I stipulate that yes, everybody who owns.
You're waiting to be unblocked. What is your Discord name? You can get in. You have a quarantine channel. You can get in the quarantine VC. can get in quarantine VC and I can drag you up. You don't have to be unquarantined.
Slaves was irrational, and it was just it was a drag on the economy to have all that free labor. So what's the point? That I mean, that there's
working
no
backwards
context,
from your conclusion that capitalism is and unfettered capitalism is,
and therefore
the way to go.
capitalism is good.
You're in there? Okay, I'm gonna pee. We're gonna finish this and I'm gonna pee and I'll be right back. I'm gonna pee.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not
because free labor, if free labor is not beneficial to the capitalist, then why should a $15 minimum wage be a problem? Why not just pay your labor whatever they want?
Yeah.
Why do we have a system that constrains wages?
It's denied.
Okay, Alacrity left that debate, so the Alacrity thing is over. Okay, let me rename this.